Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. I am sitting here with Sabrina Trobak. Sabrina Trobak is the author of Not Good Enough Understanding Your Core Belief in Anxiety, and she holds a master's in counseling psychology and leverages over 20 years of educational experience, along with over 15 years of counseling experience, including extensive trauma training, to provide holistic counseling and clinical supervision at Trobak Holistic Counseling. Sabrina, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for coming on the show. We have a lot of interesting ground to cover. But before we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today is which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
I'd say probably Wile E. Coyote, not so much because he's always trying to chase down and eat the Roadrunner, but because he's pretty creative. He steps outside of the normal thinking and tries to challenge and think of new and interesting ways of doing things. He's been knocked down many times and he just kind of keeps getting up and trying again. And I've done, a lot of things that are definitely outside of my comfort zone and have been knocked down a few times. Get up and often find that I'm actually even better on the other side of it.
I really like that. I like the fact that you really latched onto that, thinking outside the box. It's great. I love that one. I really do. Just sliding into things here a little bit easy as we normally do on the show. How do you define procrastination and what does it mean to you personally?
Procrastination, I think, is just simply putting things off. There can be varying degrees of it, and there can be healthy times where we procrastinate, and then also unhealthy times that we procrastinate as well. For me, I try pretty hard to have a lot of different strategies in place to help reduce the amount of procrastination that I have. I have some pretty steadfast rules that I follow on a regular basis. If I get an email, I respond right away. Anything that goes into my calendar, if it comes up, I do it then. I don't put it off so it doesn't get lost. I often find if I procrastinate, I often then forget. And so I really try to address it so I'm not procrastinating because then I'm not forgetting for sure. I think it's okay to procrastinate in some areas. So, for example, I'm talking with a girlfriend and I see her phone number come up on my phone, but I know she's really struggling with something, but I don't have time to call right now. I'm, in the middle of something. So I may not answer the phone and kind of procrastinate, finish off what I'm doing, give her a call back in a half an hour and say, hey, I have time now. Let's chat about whatever we need to. So we always have to kind of weigh things on why we're doing it as to what makes it more healthy or unhealthy rather than the actual behavior itself.
I like what you said there about, kind of judging if it's something that's, kind of in the realm of being acceptable or not. You mentioned that you have a lot of rules and the different systems in place like that zero inbox rule. We all know that there's no real silver bullet. Everybody's different. But what's been your sort of secret sauce to overcoming procrastination? Has it been mainly that email rule or has it been
Say that it actually goes back to that core belief. So the model of therapy that I practice really looks at your core belief, feeling not good enough, not important, not valued. Generally, if you feel not good enough, not important, not valued, you're going to have more insecurity, more self-doubt. You are often going to procrastinate more. We just put things off because we don't believe that we can handle it in the moment. So one of the things that I've done the most to really help me not procrastinate is I've really worked on identifying and figuring out my core belief and challenging and changing it. So now my core belief is feeling much more good enough, important, and valued. And so when something comes up, I trust in myself that I can handle it. And so I just deal with it and do it. Procrastination we look at as more of a symptom of anxiety or a symptom of that core belief, not good enough, not important, not valued. We talk about anxiety as lack of confidence, not believing in myself that I can handle something. So people often talk about anxiety about, being about the thing. I have anxiety of, going to new places. Well, if that was true, then everyone would have anxiety of that. Not everyone does. It's about my belief in myself. If I believe I can handle going to new places, I'm not going to have anxiety. If I don't believe I can handle going to new places, I am going to have more anxiety. If I have more anxiety, I'm going to procrastinate and put it off and not do it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Challenging that core belief though, I mean we're talking about something that's it's generally created very early on, right? I believe somebody said between the ages of like, well, 0 and I guess 12, you're kind of getting that set up.
You know, I say that it's almost even generational. You know, if I have two parents whose core belief is not good enough, not important, not valued, how can they teach me otherwise? It becomes really challenging. So it definitely starts, you know, as soon as we're born as young children, but often even goes back to generationally. And it doesn't even necessarily stop at any point in time. You know, there's always things still that pop up in my head where I'll go, oh, I'm not good enough. And then I have to challenge myself on that and say, wait, stop. Yes, you are. This is that old way of thinking. We're not doing that anymore. Challenging myself to look at things in a bit of a different way. The trouble with that core belief is it's often very unconscious because it's been going on for so long. We're not even really aware it's there and how significant it drives our decisions, our perceptions, our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors, our relationships. It plays a very significant role in that. So if we're not even aware, it makes it really hard to see a lot of long term change.
You're absolutely correct in that. Um, I love that you said that, if you aren't aware of the problem, then you can't really change it. I guess this comes to my question is these core beliefs, or this one core belief that where we'll focus on not good enough, to what extent do you think that that comes from sort of the close sphere of influence? So, mother, father, uncle, family, immediate family, extended family. And what percentage would come from maybe society as a whole?
I think they're both vital and both significant. I think, you know, family is our first line. And so a lot of that comes from the family and then that immediate connection. But how much of that immediate connection, how much of our family's perceptions and beliefs is based on their belief on social norms? And so it's still playing a role in that as well. You know, we can definitely say that experiences, people who've experienced trauma, it definitely impacts that core belief, not good enough. But what also impacts it is not being able to sort through and feel it. We are not good at talking about our emotions. We just stuff them down, stuff them down, stuff them down. They don't go away, they stay there. And so it gets harder and harder and harder to cope with things, making me feel more and more like I can't handle things, reinforcing that core belief not good enough. So, you know, our parents definitely, for the vast majority of us, we weren't talking about emotions. We didn't even know we were supposed to talk about emotions in my generation. And so it was never really talked about. So it just feeds into that more and more. But that's a societal norm. If society had taught my parents that it was okay to talk about emotions, it would look very different in how my parents interacted with me. But you know, I was brought up with emotions. No, we don't talk about those.
No, I definitely understand that. It was on the tail end of that. The whole children are seen and not heard, or they don't, speak unless spoken to. Yeah, feelings were not necessarily weak. It's just that you didn't show them anywhere outside of closed doors. Stiff upper lip, all that fun stuff. I just want to go back there for a minute. This whole feeling of not good enough, and where do we start, or where does somebody start if they? And again, I know this is huge, but where does somebody start, especially in a society where you know, we're geared for instant validation, whether it's from drawings from we give to our parents, put on the fridge, or whether it's from, Susie down the street who likes my photo of my dog. We're just geared to this constant validation. Do you think that that's what's giving us this sort of perpetual spiral downward? And how do we get out of that?
It definitely feeds into it, right? So again, if my core belief is not good enough, I'm not going to believe in myself. I'm not going to trust in myself. So I need more of that external validation. The more I believe in myself, the less I need that external validation. It becomes more noise. I can kind of see through it a bit more. So they kind of feed off of each other, right? I'm feeling insecure. I need external validation. Now that external validation has more power, more influence, which then creates more self doubt, more insecurity. And it just becomes this cycle where they're really kind of feeding off of each other.
And this raises a question, and I want to get your input on it. Obviously, much experience in the human condition. The elephant in the room seems to be artificial intelligence, and how I have seen Some, it started out with basic characters for friends, and now they've got girlfriends, and now they've got therapists and doctors that are AI. Do you think that there's any sort of difference between an AI who's friendly and giving you a validation? Is there any difference between that and, say, just a stranger or somebody on the street you don't know giving you some validation?
Uh, I think one of the big things that's important, whether it's AI or the internet or texting or any of those things, is it reduces vulnerability. When I'm having to have a conversation directly with someone else, I have to be more vulnerable. But when I know on the other side it's a machine, I don't have to be as vulnerable. I don't have to worry as much about what that response may be. And so it makes me feel a bit safer. Generally, we said we don't like to feel emotions. Well, one of the ones that people struggle the most with is vulnerability. Most of us have been hurt at some point in our lives, often as kids, and it made us feel vulnerable. And as kids, we often went, "Ooh, I'm never feeling that again. I didn't like that." And so we actively, unconsciously, actively work at making sure we don't feel vulnerable. So for me to have a conversation with person one-on-one is very different from me having to have a conversation through the internet or through text, where there's a bit of that disconnect that happens there. And so those kind of things play a significant role. It feels safer for me to talk about my issues, my concerns to an AI who's programmed and chances going to tell me something back that's going to be supportive. Whereas to say that to a person who now has the opportunity to judge me, to give their opinion back, to reject me, that's a little too scary. So a lot of these devices that we see happening now, part of why there's some comfort there is because it helps us push down those emotions so we don't have to feel them as much.
And just going into that too, in the and I apologize. I go on this quite a bit. My major concern, and maybe I'm just hearing that I have no reason to worry might be nice, but my worry is that who's going to want to have a regular human relationship in the next, let's say, couple of generations, if, as you said, we don't want to feel icky, we don't want to feel vulnerable, and I'd rather talk to Alexa, or whatever name you want to give it, because they always play my favorite music, they always spend time with me, they never say mean things to me, they never do anything bad, they never disagree. Is that going to be detrimental to just connecting in general over the next couple of generations?
Absolutely. I think the thing that's important to remember, though, is it's detrimental, but it's meeting our needs. That's why all these things are in place. Like if AI gave us that, but everybody was like, well, no, I want to connect with people. I want to have vulnerability. I want to have healthy relationships, then AI would look different. But there's a lot of research that goes into all these things. And there's people who know, who are creating AI, oh, people don't like to feel vulnerable. People are disconnected. People are scared of rejection. So let's create something where they don't have to be as defensive about those things. And so part of why people are drawn to that aspect of AI where we can create robotic friends is because it's meeting a need for me. I don't want to connect with people, so I'll connect with a robot. It's safer that way. I can feel connected without really having to be vulnerable and connect.
I think there's an oxymoron somewhere in there, like closed fist, or no, open fist, I think was what it was. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting just seeing how it's affecting just relationships in general. Do you think that AI can ever really replace a therapist or a coach at some point?
I don't think they can replace. And again, I am not a tech specialist. I'm not an AI. I don't have a ton of experience in it. I don't think anything can replace anything 100%. But is there opportunities where it could be used to enhance things? Probably. We look at the waiting list. Currently right now I have about a year waiting list for my counseling agency. If someone can use an AI as a way of gaining a better understanding about anxiety, about anger, about feeling emotions, and learn more information, well, that's going to be a benefit to them. But to hope that an AI is going to be able to really help them resolve and sort through things, some of their trauma, is probably not very realistic, especially today, maybe in 10 or 20 years from now. But I would like to think that part of what makes a therapist effective is their ability to kind of understand at that more emotional, personal, human level that an AI is it can be programmed to do, but it's still not going to have that same effect.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's and again, I know I prefer human connection, but it's just me. Just swinging back a bit to your book, and I know that my audience is now rolling their eyes with the back of their heads because they know what I'm going to ask next. Because I always say it, they say that writing a book is 98% procrastination and 2% actually doing it. How true is that for you?
Well, my book took me 7 years to write, so that may tell you a bit right there. I was working full time, single mom with two kids, just kind of plugging in the book as I went. And I'm actually now grateful it took me as long as it did because it totally changed and became something very different than what I originally was just going to be a book giving information. But as I continued to work on it, I made it more into a handbook. So you're reading a small part of the information and then you're applying it to your own experience. So there was a lot of editing, revamping, figuring things out before I really got to the place where it was ready to go to the publisher for sure. And there was definitely some procrastination in there too. But again, I think some of that procrastination may have been of benefit as well. It made it better.
No, I can see how it could make it better in the process. I mean, there's obviously a lot of challenges to be overcome when it comes to writing a book. What do you think was the biggest challenge for you in those 7 years writing the book?
I never, ever, ever, ever in my life ever thought about writing a book. So it was a huge learning curve for me. I've read many books, but I've never been a writer, never thought about being a writer. So just figuring out how to piece it together, how to figure out what are chapters, what do I put in different chapters, how do I make sure that information doesn't overlap. So even just the layout itself was very challenging for sure. And then working with the editor, one of the big pieces was the actual editing. And, I guess I can be a bit wordy. And so the editor was very good at kind of just condensing things, kind of saying, you already said this, removing that information. So making my words more precise and having more of an impact rather than that repetition was probably also a really big piece for me as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That segues into a few more questions I have rolling around in my head, actually. But before I get to those ones, the next question I have there is, what do you think is the most important part of coming up with and writing a book? Is it the outline, like you said? Is it the overall idea? Is it editing? What is the most important part, do you think?
Well, for me, the most important part was coming up with the idea of how do I help people get a better understanding of what their core belief and how it is. So getting the focus of the book was definitely significant. But then after that, it was how do I create it so people read it? The book is for people who have higher anxiety. I was a teacher for 20 years. I know that people with higher anxiety don't like to read. So how do you make a book for people who don't like to read? It becomes challenging. But then again, as a learning assistant teacher for 20 years, I learned some different tools. So the way the book is designed also plays into that. So there's a lot of diagrams, a lot of charts. It's broken into very small sections. So you can read a third of a page and stop for the day. So it was really important to me that it was chunked and presented in a way that if someone opened the book, they wouldn't go, oh, no, that's too much and put it away. They'd open it and think, maybe I could read this. There's very few page spreads in my book that are 2 full pages of text. Most of it is broken up into smaller chunks. So that was really important. And that took a lot of time as we're editing and rewriting to make sure that things were broken up into very small sections.
No, I like that, making it easy to digest, so to
Mhm.
speak. And the other question I had about that was, in the book, why did you focus as the book on as the medium? I always love asking people this question. You mentioned yourself you didn't really think about writing a book before. What made you decide on the book as the medium as opposed to I don't know blog posts, social media posts, podcasts? even radio or video of some kind?
The answer that comes to mind first is I'm old school. So when I first started about how do I reach out to other people, that was 10 years ago. A book was definitely one of the ones that popped into mind first. Since I've published my book, I've gotten much more involved in the social media piece of it. But really, up until my book was published, I didn't spend a lot of time on a lot of social media stuff at all. So that was very foreign to me and was a huge learning curve in writing the book so I thought writing the book was a hard part, promoting it after and doing all the social media and figuring all that stuff out. That was a massive learning curve for me as well.
So do you think that you do it again after having gone through the process?
If there's an interest, if people want to learn more, I think there's potential for it for sure. This one is more on kind of individual. I would love to do a second book on that core belief not good enough in families. And so looking at the impact on mom, dad, kids, how to challenge that as a family and in relationships. But yeah, the focus is still this one for now. But there is something kind of percolating back there for sure.
No, I like that. For sure that we want to share those ideas, but it sounds like a really good one. The idea of families and how you get there, because I suppose you're right, and in your experience, even if the parents are both type A go getters, maybe the child is not. It has that not good enough. Actually, probably more so if they're both type A go getters.
I mean, so being a type A go getter doesn't necessarily mean that your core belief is good enough, important, and valued, and it doesn't mean it's not good enough, important, and valued. If I'm a go getter because I need to prove to everybody that I'm good enough, then often that core belief not good enough is more significant. And so then the go getter behavior can kind of look like I'm micromanaging my child, I'm hovering over my child, I'm doing everything for my child so that my child isn't learning how to take on their own responsibilities and do these own things for themselves. So it can be very detrimental. If that go-getter is more of a healthy core belief, good enough, important, and valued, they're teaching their child how to think for themselves, how to problem solve, how to organize and plan different kind of daily activities that are going on for them, getting ready for school, making their lunch. They're supporting them in learning these skills as opposed to doing them for them. So we always have to kind of look past the behavior at more that core belief. What's feeding the behavior? Is it coming from a healthy core belief or a more unhealthy core belief?
No, I like how you say that, and I actually wonder. You've got 20 years of experience in the education sector. Do you believe that we could change the system a little to help? I'm not going to say eradicate this core belief of not good enough, but I mean, isn't the entire education system set up to sort of make you feel that way in one way or another? Not necessarily intentionally, but it's the way it seems to play out.
I think it reinforces, sadly, what's often already there. And so if I'm coming to school where there's already been chaos in the home, my mom's yelling at me because I'm running late and my lunch isn't packed, or I haven't had breakfast because we don't have enough money, or all those kind of things. And now I come into school, I'm already starting behind the eight ball. So then things happen, I'm struggling in a class or whatever it is. It just reinforces and supports that core belief, not good enough. Part of why I left the school system is because I knew I wanted to do counseling at a deeper level. As a school counselor, I was simply trying to put out fires. That was my job, and really that was a mandate. There wasn't a lot more there wasn't a lot more space in the school to be able to do much more than that. And so by having my own private practice, now I'm not putting out fires. I'm figuring out, why are they burning in the first place? How do we deal with the fuel and address it at that level? But the school's mandate, it can't be that. A part of what happened when I transitioned from the schools into private practice is I figured I would be working with kids, but I'm not. I mostly work with adults because it's much easier for parents to influence their children than it is for children to try to influence their parents. So the vast majority of my clientele are adults. And generally, if I'm working with kids, I also want to work with the parents as well. And usually within a short period of time, usually within 2 to 6 months, I don't have to work with the child anymore because the parents are doing the work. I don't want to be the added person in someone's family. I want to be the support where the family is now working together and figuring those things out. But it's much more challenging for a child to try to make those changes with their parents than it is for the parents to influence their children.
No, it's interesting that you say that, because when they say that we want a systemic change, we go from the ground up. But if you want another change, it has to go from the top down. It's an interesting sort of chicken and egg question, isn't it? Because if the parents aren't capable of, and again, parents do the best they can with what they got, but kids too. Maybe we don't give kids enough credit, right? I mean, I'm not saying that they are wise, but sometimes they have less of a filter than we do.
They can be pretty insightful and see things from a perspective that we as adults has been normalized. And so we don't even really notice it as much anymore. But for youth or younger people, they're experiencing these things in a new way. They've never really experienced them before. They're going to notice them a lot more. Someone else who's been going through it for years and years and years, it just kind of numbs. We don't notice it as much.
So, do you think that we in society we are? I'm not going to say we condone it, but we make it easy to accept these core beliefs just because it's easier to accept it and go on with their lives than it is to try and correct it.
It definitely is normalized for sure. A lot of people aren't even really aware it's there. And so if I'm not aware it's there, how can I do anything about it? I don't even know I'm supposed to. So a lot of my clients, when I first start talking to them, when we talk about that core belief, a lot of the comments back is, yeah, that's exactly how I feel, but I never even realized that was there. And so it's such an unconscious drive that we're not even aware it's really there. We just end up kind of repeating the cycles over and over and over and over and over again. Once we become aware, we go, oh, wait a sec. Then we can start to do things about it. But it's such a normal part of our life. It's almost like, walking or speaking English. We just do it. We don't even really think about it.
Well, and I guess that's part of the battle, right? Half the battle is knowing. So, how would somebody without having some sort of cataclysmic, apocalyptic type event in their life, how would they go about maybe getting the kind of awareness that maybe they might need to work on?
I think listening to your podcast, we know that there's much more information out there now about mental health. So just learning a little bit more, a little bit at a time, you can kind of go, I never really thought about it like that before. And then that opens up your thinking to maybe another area or another piece of information that's more creates more awareness as well. So, just little things like listening to podcasts, reading information, scrolling on TikTok or whatever, things that are informative and helping you gain information around mental health. All those things can be very insightful where we look at very small changes. I always say to my client, we want small, gradual changes over a long period of time. Evolution versus revolution. Small, gradual change is much more sustainable than really quick change. And so we're doing it, right? Just even realizing, man, I'm just not very happy. I just feel like blah. Okay, well, so something's going on. I'm now at a point where I'm okay to acknowledge that I'm not really living my best life. Well, good for you. That means that you believe in yourself enough that you can now finally start to acknowledge something that before you weren't able to acknowledge. What's the next step, right? Little tiny steps, and we need to practice those steps before we take the next step.
No, I definitely like that. The small steps, chunking it down, just always moving forward. Just 1% better every day, or 0.1% better every day.
Exactly.
Um, it's interesting because actually one of the initiatives that I'm working on is trying to get a dedicated mental health class into schools. It's been a little bit difficult. There's been a lot of pushback. I mean, I understand, but maybe you could shed some more light on this. I mean, I've been trying too young. I mean, I've been trying to start this really seventh, eighth grade and into high school, because I figured that's when you'd be have the mental faculties to know about awareness and other things. But there's been a lot of pushback. Is it because maybe it's too young, or is it something else?
Where are you? Are you in Alberta?
I'm actually in Ontario.
In Ontario. Okay. I'm over in BC. And what I see is actually, I don't know if it's a specific mental health class, but kids are learning a lot more about anxiety. They're learning how to do some breathing. They're able to talk about what they're feeling. They often have like the color zones, right? So I red, yellow, and green. So I'm red, I need to go for a walk or go to the quiet corner for a bit. So we are getting better at talking more about it, incorporating it more within the schools in BC anyways, which is where I am. I'm not sure, I really am not sure about what's going on in Ontario, but often what we see is when people are resistant to something, it's because it's creating emotion that we don't want to feel. And so if I do what I always do, then I don't ever have to feel vulnerable, insecure, self doubt, worry, right? I don't have to feel those emotions. So we'll just keep status quo. Even though we may know status quo may not be the best, it's predictable. Our brain likes predictability. And so as soon as there's something that is new, it's not as predictable. We often put the brakes on because it creates more insecurity, more self doubt, more anxiety, more fear. And so we slow down on doing those kind of things.
No, that's yeah, well, better the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? That's the saying. We'd rather be uncomfortable in an abusive relationship than comfortable being, well, alone, I guess, right? Which is kind of the interesting kind of conundrum. It goes back to those basic human needs, right? No, I like that. I really love the fact that you bring to light that we have this underlying, and it's not conscious, it's not on purpose. It's basically a kind of a misplaced defense mechanism, right? So I mean, it's not really that we're broken. It's that we got a little wire adjustment to do or a little programming adjustment to do. What do you think is the most important takeaway from the book that you would want people to have when they read it?
Probably just the awareness, getting a better understanding of how all these things work, how your core belief works, how it's developed over the years, what anxiety is and how anxiety works, what anxiety looks like. We often realize what our anxiety looks like when it's really, really high, like panic attack mode, but we don't necessarily think about what our anxiety looks like when it's a 3, 4, or 5 out of 10, which means I'm not doing anything about it until it's a lot higher. So becoming more aware of those subtle things like, oh, I'm procrastinating a lot more than I was. My anxiety is likely going up, right? So we need to become more aware of what those symptoms are as our anxiety is progressing. So if I can put strategies in place lower, then it doesn't have to continue to escalate. So becoming more aware of anxiety, anger, right? We look at anger in the book and we talk about how anger is not a standalone emotion. We don't like to feel our emotions. So when emotions come up that I don't like to feel, I'll switch it to anger. Now I just have to feel anger. Anger has been socially acceptable for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so we're usually a bit more okay to feel angry than we are to feel other emotions. So if I'm starting to feel anxiety and I get angry, now I just have to feel angry. But the also thing is now I'm getting angry. So guess what? People back off and leave me alone. So now my anxiety goes down. So anger is a secondary emotion. It's what we use to suppress and stop feeling those other emotions as well. So we talk about that in the book. We talk about coping strategies for coping with anxiety. What are some healthy coping strategies that we can use? What do emotions feel like in our body? We've spent most of our lives suppressing our emotions. So now to have to feel my emotions, a lot of people aren't even really able to tell the difference between a thought and an emotion. And so we need to get better at identifying what an emotion is and being able to label it and feel it. If I can't do that, I'm not going to let it out. I have to be able to understand what it is in order to let it out. The more I let that emotion out, the more confident I'm going to feel in being able to handle things because I'm not carrying all this extra emotion with me.
You said something interesting there, and I wonder if this fits. So, anger is not a standalone emotion. But I mean, is it possible that we have anger? Is that attached to the yes, it feels better to be angry than anxious. But is it that, it feels safer to be angry? Because as you said, people move away. So is it a safety thing sometimes?
For sure. And it's just more normalized, right? So I feel safer feeling anger than I would feeling anxiety because I've been around anger. I grew up with anger in my home. I see anger all over the place. So it feels safer because it's more normalized. I've seen it time after time after time after time. It's predictable. I know how to handle it. I know what it looks like. Anxiety, fear, self doubt, lonely, rejection, not as comfortable with those because I haven't practiced them as much. The more we practice, the more comfortable it feels, the more safe it feels.
Sabrina, this has been a really enlightening conversation. I could probably go for another 3 or 4 hours, just me, but that's just me.
No, me too. I can talk for days.
We are coming up pretty close to the time. Was there anything that you wish I would have asked, but I didn't ask, or anything you feel that we should have covered that we didn't cover today?
I mean, like I said, I could go on forever. I think it's a pretty good start for sure. What I would just really recommend to listeners is take that first step. Even if the first step is scary, start thinking about taking that first step. That can be the first step, is even just thinking about it. What would it look like? What would happen? The more I think about it, the more I'm practicing it in my head. Now it's not going to be as scary when I do it. So just little steps, one after another, very small. We can slowly make change over a period of time.
Such a powerful note to end on. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Serena.
Thanks for having me.
Just before we go, what is the best way for our listeners to reach out and learn more?
Probably through my website. So my website is trobakholistic.org. On my website, I have my contact information with my cell phone and my email address. I have all my links to all my social media on there. I have a link for if you want to go in and purchase my book. I have a blog section on there that is usually 2 to 4 minutes reads. Again, short reads for people who often struggle more with reading. So just short little blurbs about different pieces of information around mental health. And I also have a page on there that has all my podcast interviews that I've done as well.
Excellent. And to all our listeners, don't worry about writing that down. We are going to have that in the show notes for you, make it really easy for you. Just once again, thank you so much for being on the show, Sabrina. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.